Hello, Alat Mansky. It's so great to see you on my laptop.
Nice to see you too, and to see your beautiful poster in the background, which heralds your new podcast.
Thank you. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about you and what you're working toward. But before we get into that, I want to ask you a loaded question. How are you? How are you and your family?
We're well. We had some worries midway through the pandemic, and we've come out the other side of that quite well. I'm feeling, we have a large family. We have 5 adult children now, and we've got 4 of them pretty close to us now, and feeling very, very pleased about that. So yeah, I'm feeling generally very, very happy about that, and with fingers crossed that that will continue during this next phase. And thank you for asking.
You're welcome, and I'm glad to hear that. Um, so things are going great for you and your family, and I'm so glad to hear that. And it hasn't been so great for a lot of people in the disability community. We know that people with disabilities have been extremely hard hit on all fronts: health, work, finances. I'm wondering, Al, through your lens, from 40 years of working in community activism and working and serving people with disabilities, what do you see as the biggest urgency that needs to be addressed for people with disabilities?
Well, there are many urgencies that need to be addressed, Anna Karina. That's the dilemma, and they hit us full force. Whether it's the what is it, 10,000 adults who are still living in long-term care facilities in Canada who shouldn't be there, whether it's the degree of poverty that exists, whether it's the lack of acknowledgement that lovers and spouses and families are an essential part of the care team when a person with a disability goes into a hospital. So there's a parade of issues. They existed before, though. And, I was thinking back in terms of this conference, Disability and Work in Canada. It was over 40 years ago, you can tell from looking at me that,
You haven't aged a day.
that a bunch of us on the West Coast were involved in an initiative there, and I know this was happening across the country, to make full employment for people with disability a goal. And I don't think we could have imagined that we'd still be talking about the degree of unemployment that exists. So COVID has revealed a lot of challenges, but we all know there have been other challenges. So I would say then that the essential issue is we have to change how we go about making change in the disability world in order that we address these tough issues.
So to make change happen, we need to change the way we go about it.
That's right. If we're seeking a transformation in our institutions, in our structures, if we're seeking to transform the architecture of support for people with disabilities, we're going to have to transform the way we make the change to secure those architectural, structural, systemic changes.
I know that one aspect of that change for you is rebranding the notion of disability. And you do that so well in your book, The Power of Disability. So trying to rebrand disability from this notion that people with disabilities need help from society, the rest of society, to the rest of society can benefit greatly from people with disabilities. Can you elaborate more?
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the book. I'm not a marketer, so I hadn't really actually thought about that in terms of rebranding. It was really more my observation of what my own daughter and colleagues in the disability world over the past 4 decades have meant to me. And there is power and force and value there. And I think I just got sick and tired of trying to make arguments that no, it shouldn't be pity, no, it shouldn't be charity. I became much more interested, and we named the book because all of my friends said, you need to call it power of disability. I was really interested in how we usher in the full force, the full power, the moral, the social, the political, and the cultural, and the economic power of people with disabilities.
What is the cultural power of people with disabilities?
Cultural power of disability is unappreciated, but extensive. If we were to take away the contributions that people with disability have made throughout history, we would not recognize the world. So there's a profound cultural power there. But there is also a cultural power in the movement, in my observation, that is extremely useful and I think fits with the times that we're in and will help get us through it. One is the power of authenticity. That's a cultural power. I think citizens everywhere, certainly in our country, but I look around the world, are looking for a different kind of leader. They're looking for authenticity, they're looking for honesty, they're looking beyond platitudes and the like. So that power of authenticity is very important. And this may surprise you, but the power of vulnerability is another power. The fact is the pandemic revealed our collective vulnerability.
Yes.
And that's not a bad place to problem solve from. And the final power, or force culturally, is the power to convene, the power to unify. And that relates to the numbers in the disability world, and it relates to the number of people who are related to people with disabilities or who are in alliance.
Okay, Al, what more, in addition to reframing the notion of disability, what more do we need to do to push this movement and to get what the community needs?
Well, with that sense of power, we can begin to think about how we can take charge of the process of change. So rather than thinking about depositing our solutions, hard-earned, hard-won solutions on the doorstep of people in power, people in government or in charge of other institutions, and then waiting for them to react or waiting for them to invite us in, we can actually imagine a whole process from design to implementation to solve the problems that are at our disposal. So new forms of democratic engagement are no longer on the margin. They're being used all over Canada and in many other parts of the world. So the magnification of our collective power into a full mighty force won't happen unless we're unified or more unified than we currently are as a movement. So it's those two are reliant on each other. The exercise of our collective power requires a unified movement.
And that means doing what differently to get to that unification?
Well, there's a number of things, but one is that we have to get beyond our own egos and sense of territoriality and the competition that exists in the disability world. So how do we move beyond that? How do we work with people who we think are actually responsible for the problems that we're trying to solve? How do we work with people who we think aren't doing enough, who aren't pulling their weight and doing their full share? So these are big challenges. They're not unique to the disability movement. They're unique to society and they're unique to every movement. But I've studied movements for about 15 years now, and the movements that tend to be successful are the ones that find a way to reconcile, that find a way to unite, that find a way to come together. They don't have to even like each other. They don't even have to respect each other. All they have to do is agree that this problem, these challenges are so big that we're not going to solve them on our own. And movements that are able to do that are movements who are able to move the dial and shift the culture, shift the legislation, shift the financial allocation of resources.
So for our audience who's listening to this, once they're done listening to our chat, what would you like them to do?
I want us to take our movement responsibilities more seriously. So we are running organizations, part of organizations. We have families. We have a lot of challenges in our work life and in our personal life. So I want us to allocate more time for our movement responsibilities, because every one of us is part of a movement, usually several. But if we take the disability movement, what is it, and ask ourselves, what is it that we can do to increase unity within the disability movement? Because by increasing unity, we have a chance to engage with culture and shift the cultural and popular perception of disability. We have a chance to rally broader popular support. And movements are the best invention possible for ensuring that kind of popular shift. When that popular shift occurs, that's when we're going to get the bold political decisions that we want. So the more we take our movement responsibilities seriously and allocate some of that time, some of the extra time we have during COVID, the stronger our movement's going to be, the more we're going to penetrate into the public consciousness, the more the shift in values, in attitudes, in those old habits are going to change, and the greater the chance we have of securing political boldness.
And we've seen time and time again that this is a community that's often the last to be considered. And we saw that in the CERB relief packages. People with disabilities were the very, very last on the list to get supports.
Yeah.
So what is it that we need to do to touch and to make this group and these needs relevant to a broader population, especially to decision makers, funders, policymakers?
So I, with Rabia Kedar, who runs Dean Community Services in Mississauga, rewrote an interpretation of what nothing about us without us means. And for Rabia and I, it means that we direct the process of system change, that we assume that we're the orchestra, we're the conductor, and that we conductor, so that we come into it with that mindset, that we secure independent funding that's not relied on government grants. We secure independent financing to finance the design, for example, of the Canadian Disability Benefit, to finance all of the lobbying, all of the relationship building that has to happen inside government, with the Prime Minister's office, with premiers, with the Senate, that we create a disability media. Imagine if we brought together, if we amalgamated all of the podcasts, all of the blogs, all of the social media challenges that are used by channels that are used by people with disabilities, all the storytellers, all of the thought leaders, and their followers and audiences, we would have an audience that would rival the Toronto Star or the Globe and Mail. So nothing about us without us means taking charge of the process and imagining all of the ingredients, all of the variables, and bringing the full force of our movement to play to engage in it.
Al Letmansky, thank you so much for your insights. So to our audience, if you haven't already, pick up a copy of Al's latest book. It's called The Power of Disability, and you can order it on his website, al@mansky.com. Pick it up for yourself or give it as a gift to family or friends. I also invite you to subscribe to my latest podcast. It's a limited edition series called More Talent Untapped, stories of people from whom we have a lot to learn, people with disabilities. You can check it out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. So thank you once again.